Welcome back to the Line Podcast. My name is Aaron Alexander, and this is a place that we bring together the world's leading experts in all things health and wellness to help you optimize your mind, body, and movement. Today's conversation is all about the intrinsics of hypnosis. Today's guest is by far and away the world's leading preeminent expert on all things hypnosis, as well as psychiatry, I would say. Dr. David Spiegel, MD, is an American psychiatrist and the Wilson Professor and Associate Chair of Psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine. He's also authored over 480 journal articles, 170 book chapters on hypnosis, psychosocial oncology, stress physiology, trauma, and psychotherapy. He has also published 13 books. This conversation, we go into some places that he hasn't gone in other interviews. I did that intentionally because I've listened to all his interviews and I wanted to go outside of the typical here. So we talked a lot about the mind in relation to the body in particular. We got into some research around psychedelics and some of the different brain states, comparing mindfulness practices, the psychedelic experience, as well as the hypnotic experience. So y'all are in for a doozy on this one. Thank you for subscribing so you get each week's episodes. If you want to watch the video, you can jump over to Spotify and see it there. We appreciate the reviews on all channels. And also we post 2 instructional videos on how to move better on the Align Podcast YouTube page. So check us out over there. This last week, we did one on ankle mobility. We did one on releasing the iliopsoas, and then we did one on primal movement with Francesca Fit over here at On It. So check out the Align Podcast YouTube page. It's freaking fantastic. I'm very proud of it. And I appreciate you guys tuning in, subscribing, sharing, doing you. That's it. That's all. Let's get to it. Dr. Spiegel, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I really admire you greatly. And I have just such high respect and appreciation for the work that you've contributed to the world.
Thank you.
And your father and your bloodline is really, it's really cool.
Thank you.
I wonder from your perspective, this is kind of an odd direction to start, but I feel compelled to ask, do you feel like Western culture has a little bit of resistance around, or maybe like fear, trepidation around the mystical experience?
Well, I think, Aaron, yes, but I think it makes mystical things that aren't really mystical, and that may either endow them with power or make you fearful and distrustful of them. But I think we have this kind of bottom-up prejudice that only the sort of physical things are the real things, and the only real treatments are the physical treatments. Ingestion, injection, or incision, and doing things from the top down is either irrelevant or mystical or suspect in some way. And yet, to me, it's a denial of the way our bodies are built, with this, 3-pound control center on the top that is the main thing that distinguishes us from other parts of the animal kingdom, to the extent that we're that different from them. And I think it makes it seem, on the one hand, both less powerful than it is, the mental control of the body and of the mind as well, and also more dangerous somehow. We manage to wind up on both ends of that spectrum, that if you're doing something psychologically, it either doesn't work or it's really scary. I think of hypnosis as dangerously effective. It's if you're going to be afraid of it, then at least use it for some good purpose.
It seems like most things that would be effective would also potentially have, if it's powerful, it could probably be powerful in both ways.
Yes, absolutely.
It's kind of like the the adage or the idea of, like, in order to experience deep joy, you also need to be open to deep sorrow.
Yes, I think that's true.
And if you want to live a life that's like, okay, I just want the bumpers on, I want like kind of this Nerf reality, have trigger warning, we're just going to stay right here, keep it safe. Yeah. It's like, you're probably not going to make a lot of progress from that lens. Like, you need to be open to, there's a cliff right there.
Yeah.
As well. But, we're actually living here.
Right. But the thing is that we seek shelter in a kind of pseudo safety. And that is, if there are opioids in that Nerf car you're driving around in, have
Right.
a very high risk of dying of an overdose. 500,000 Americans in the last 10 years have
Yeah.
died of,
Comfortably numb.
yeah, drug overdoses. So the apparent safety in the sort of physical remedies is just apparent. It's not real.
Mm. Yeah. I learned I like the verbiage of Western culture largely trusts, you didn't say this, but paraphrasing, the, ingestion, incision,
In the
or injection,
injection, yeah,
injection. Yeah. Injection, or incisions. We kind of, I feel like in a way have divorced ourselves, not everyone, but some folks divorced ourselves of just the magnificence and the elegance of the mind and its capacity to seamlessly fuse through every cell within the body,
right,
compared to coming in with a crude tool and saying, okay, we'll just cut this.
yeah,
And if you can bridge that gap, still have the tools as an availability,
yeah,
but also pour some energy and bandwidth into just the elegance of the mind and what it can do in such a seamless fashion. I feel like that's the direction of the future. But re-bridging that gap, it's, if people are suspicious of anything that's not a blade, it's an interesting conversation to
yeah.
start to renegotiate and bridge that gap.
I agree. Well, I mean, it's the mind that tells those fingers what to do with the scalpel, So that's a mental act
Right.
too. But I also agree with you that there's a sort of false comfort in what it is called the science of physical intervention, and science is very important. I spent my life doing it, but at the same time, there is a science of mental intervention too. There was just an article in the Times yesterday by a neurophysiologist from Hopkins who has a rare tumor in his heart, and he's hoping he's going to survive it. He's doing well at the moment, but he said, my father was a psychoanalyst, and my father would talk about how the mind can affect the course of cancer. And, I'm not one of these people that teaches people to just wish away your cancer and it'll go away. But he said, there's some evidence that tumors are innervated. And if that's the case, then the nervous system may have a direct contact with tumor that could affect tumor growth. It's not proven at this point, but it's a kind of interesting hypothesis. And there are a lot of other pathways too. So the idea that we can control a lot that's going on in our bodies by using our brains better, to me, is just so obvious that, everybody ought to accept it, but we don't see it that way.
Yeah. I wonder from your perspective, well, I want to touch on all of the nuts and bolts of hypnosis. So maybe we can start there. What surprised you recently about hypnosis and about the mind and the subconscious? I've listened to all your interviews for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I know there's the fundamentals that need to be gone over,
Sure.
but
sure.
Is your mind still being blown at this point in relation to the subconscious?
What's sort of new, there have been some recent articles out, Aaron, about, altered states of consciousness that include hypnosis, mindfulness, but also psychedelic drugs, for example.
Sure.
And what we're seeing is that what used to be thought of as an always gradual process of understanding more and rearranging your life history and your management of emotions can sometimes be a rather sudden process. And so, I've reviewed the literature on people with dying cancer patients taking psilocybin once or twice, sure, with psychotherapy, with structured therapy. And they say they feel that their view of life is different, and they were terrified of dying. But they saw it from a different point of view. One guy said that he was a combat veteran who had lost a buddy of his and spent much of his life feeling guilty and awful about, not having saved his buddy. And he had this image during a psilocybin trip of his buddy talking to him and saying, look, I'm dead. You're not doing me any good by making your life a mess. So let it go. Wow. And he said, it kind of freed him. And in the same way, people look at death and they see it, but they also see the miracle that they're alive to look at it. that they have life at
Yeah.
all. And so, you don't really live authentically, the existential philosopher said, until you face non-being. And it makes your being more miraculous. And so I had metastatic breast cancer patients in a weekly support group, and they would say that talking about death in this group is like looking into the Grand Canyon when you're afraid of heights. If you fell, it would be a disaster, but you feel better about yourself because you're able to look. I can't say I feel serene, but I can look at it. So there are ways of, and I think part of the process of psychotherapy, and what I know it's true in hypnosis, is that it's what people used to fear as suggestibility. It's really cognitive flexibility, that you can see an old problem from a new point of view. You just cut that off. You say, let's forget how I always deal with this, or what I would feel about myself or other people would feel about me if I did it. Let me just try a different way. And sometimes people can make very rapid changes in a hurry. So I've had people in hypnosis, I just on our Reverie app, we had a 35-year-old woman write to us that she'd been trying for years, for like 15 years, to stop smoking. She'd failed to do it, including using hypnosis. And she tried the app and focused on, for my body, smoking's a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. So she focused on protecting and respecting her body rather than fighting smoking. She said, I've stopped. And I am just so happy that I did it. And so in a way, it was not a gradual process. And so I think some of the processes of change that can happen mentally is that we can use our brain to just cut loose the old wrong ways of dealing with a problem and try on a new one. And if you look at neuroimaging of some of these mind-body processes like hypnosis, where when you concentrate intently using your executive control network in the prefrontal cortex, you turn down activity in the default mode network in the back of the brain, the posterior cingulate cortex, and to the extent that you're doing that. So that's the mechanism for dissociating what you're doing now from what you usually do. And in the same way, research on mindfulness has shown that experienced meditators turn down activity in the default mode network. Just get over yourself is a lot of what meditation is. Don't worry about yourself, just be. And I think
it's also activating. It's also activating the cerebellum and that interoception and a deeper connection with self, with like body self.
Body self, that's right. You experience the world through your body is a major sensory organ that we don't pay much attention to. It's one of the ways on Reverie I teach people how to handle stress. I say just start out, instead of focusing on the stressor out there, which you can't instantly change, focus on the interoception of how your body reacts to stress. Because you notice that your heart rate goes up, you breathe more shallowly, your muscles get tense, you start to sweat, and then you think, oh my God, this is really bad. So what you're now doing is augmenting your perception of the stressor. You feel even more helpless and worse, and then your body reacts to that. And it's like a snowball effect. So I say, forget the stressor for a minute. Let's get your body comfortable. Imagine you're floating in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or just floating in space. And notice how, even though the stressor hasn't changed, your body has. You're feeling better. So you're already controlling one aspect of the stressor, even though you haven't changed the stressor yet. So now we're going to use an imaginary screen. On the left side, picture one thing about the stressor that bothers you, and learn to do it while you keep your body comfortable. And then on the other side, picture one thing you can do about the stressor. So you're beginning now to build a strategy for dealing with the stressor, but only after you've managed that interoceptive component that you referred to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the interoception part is interesting. Like if you're able to lean into the intelligence of the body, which even saying things like the intelligence of the body, I think can make some people maybe roll their eyes and be like, oh, here we go. But it's real. And there's extensive research to suggest that the body knows what's happening, if there's danger, if there's suspicion, if there's something, before the brain, before the conscious mind can express that idea. The body tracked that a while ago.
Yeah.
And I could cite a bunch of research around that. I'm not going to, but there's lots of research to suggest that the body's listening very deeply.
Well, my old buddy, Bessel van der Kolk, we were residents together at Mass Mental Health Center at Harvard a long time ago, wrote The Body Keeps the Score. It's been on the Times bestseller list for like 3 years. And it's about his understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that what we've overlooked in a lot of it is that just the somatic reactions to stress and trauma are a big part of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's what makes it so hard to think about, because you get this somatic reaction. Flashbacks are not just remembering, but reliving the events. So that's got the interoception with it, along with the psychological aspects of it. And that's, again, where hypnosis can be extremely helpful. I had a social worker came to see me who had been, it was an attempted rape where she was coming home, and she just wanted to use hypnosis to try and picture the guy's face, because what happened was she fought him off. She called the cops. She hadn't actually been raped, so they lost interest. And then she had a generalized seizure, and it turned out she'd suffered a basilar skull fracture from the guy beating on her.
Wow.
And so she wanted to see if she could see him. So she's very hypnotizable. We're reliving the event, and I do the same thing where you get your body comfortable and picture on one side of the screen some aspect of what happened. So she says, you know what? The look on his face, if he gets me upstairs to my apartment, he's not just going to rape me, he's going to kill me. So she realized that it was even worse than she thought it was. I said, so what did you do to protect yourself? And so on the other side of the screen, she said, you know what? He's surprised that I'm fighting that hard. He didn't think I would. So she realized on the one hand that it was even worse than she thought. And on the other hand, that she probably saved her life by fighting that hard. She was feeling guilty about it. I got myself so badly injured. So it changed her whole perspective on what happened. And that's, again, these kind of rapid changes you can have when you are in a different mental state, when you can approach a problem from a new point of view. And so what has excited me is that we can help people now. We have like 5,000 people a month using Reverie. And I'm helping more people talking to you now than I did in 3 months of practice the old-fashioned way. And the fact that we can trigger in people these changes in mental state that allow them to heal themselves, to help themselves take a new point of view about an old problem. Now, normally it's not for PTSD, that's pretty severe stuff, but for things like smoking, reducing stress, sleeping better, eating better, those are all things that people can learn to do for themselves. And part of it comes from a sudden, not a gradual change in mental state. So we get 35% reductions in self-reported stress, 35% reductions in self-reported pain in 15 minutes by people just learning to do self-hypnosis. And so, your initial question, Aaron, is one that still bothers me. Why is it that we don't take more seriously the intrinsic abilities that people have to better manage themselves? For
the invisible.
For most of human history, women have given birth without, epidurals or other kinds of medication and procedure. They don't lie down, they squat, and they give birth to kids, and most of the time it works out pretty well. I'm not recommending enduring pain; you don't have to, but we have evolved to use our brain for most of our evolutionary history. And we're here, so something must have worked right. And the ability to manage your brain better has tremendous therapeutic potential.
Yeah, I did a couple podcasts with a guy called Dr. Stanley Krippner, who Do you know Stanley?
I know Stanley, sure.
Wow, how cool!
Yeah, he's the School of Psychology up in San Francisco.
Yeah. I went out to his place in wherever it was in California, and we recorded one there. And he's great. I hope is he still kicking?
I think he is. I haven't heard recently. I haven't seen about it, but I think he is. I think he's sort of retired now, but he's still around.
Yeah, I went to his like 80-something birthday several years ago.
Yeah.
And but anyway, in that conversation, one of the things, so you're already familiar with his work, but one of the things that he's written about quite extensively is one's hypnotic ability throughout history would be potentially a deciding factor for a person that's able to heal from whatever the ailment may be before we had surgical intervention or not. Right. And now you see that across all studies, like placebo effect is very real. And we need to like control for placebo. It's like, why don't we lean into placebo?
Absolutely. Because it's the best analgesic out there. I'm more people than anything else, except for hypnosis. But
yeah. So I wonder, like I'd be interested in understanding more. I know that you guys at Stanford and probably other places as well have done a lot of research with fMRI,
Right.
observing anatomically, neurologically what's happening.
Right.
I'd love if you would be open to sharing that. I know you shared it several times before other places, but just like a brief overview of what's actually happening in
Right.
the hypnotic state.
Right.
And then also if there's any relationship between the psychedelic state,
Yeah.
between the meditative state, the mindfulness state. Is there any kind of
There
relevance
are
relationship between
there
those?
is there are overlaps, but there are differences too that are pretty interesting. So
Hmm.
we got interested, Aaron, in understanding what's going on in the brain based on some earlier studies we did showing that you could alter perceptual processing in hypnosis. So uh, years ago, using EEG, we took some Stanford students and shocked them, just a little electric shock to the wrist, and recorded what are called the evoked potential. So you get this wave response of electrical activity timed to the shocks. And we got a normal set of three at a tenth of a second, 3/10, and half a second after it. And then we hypnotized them, and they were all highly hypnotizable, and gave them the same shocks. And the tenth of a second response disappeared completely.
Hmm.
And the third of a second and half a second responses were half as big. So this means that the brain didn't simply say, oh, there's a shock there, and I think I won't pay much attention to it. It just turned down activity from the beginning. So it just said, this is less important. I'm going to pay attention to something else. That happens in hypnosis. So we wanted to know more about what was going on in the brain. So we scanned a whole bunch of mostly Stanford students, classified them as high or low in hypnotizability, and I'll talk about that in a minute afterwards, and then hypnotized them in the scanner. And so we had two hypnosis conditions, one going on a vacation, one just feeling good. We had just rest and also a mental task to contrast them, high and low hypnotizable. So we looked for what was different in the fMRI. And so MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, is very good at measuring activity in different parts of the brain and very precise anatomically as well, which is different from EEG. And so in the condition where they were hypnotized and high hypnotizables only, we saw three things happening. We turned down activity in the dorsal part of the anterior cingulate cortex. The cingulate cortex is like a C on its edges down at the base of the brain. And the front part of it is involved in what we call salience detection. It's a pattern matcher. And so while we're talking, there's suddenly a loud noise, we'll both get distracted and wonder, is there a danger over there? We better do something. Or it's what the social media do when they float some potential threat by you and get you to shift gears and go pay attention to that. So we turn down activity in that area. So you're more able to get intensely focused, which is what hypnosis really is, intense focus of attention. If you're less likely to worry about distractors, just go with this. It's been called believed in imagination. It's happening, and you feel like if you're watching a movie, you feel like you're in the movie, not in the audience watching the movie. You don't judge and evaluate your experience. So that's turning down salience network. The second thing is increasing functional connectivity between the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that's part of our executive control network. It's hopefully what I'm using right now in talking to you, and the insula. The insula is another part of the salience network that is a mind-body conduit. So it helps the brain control the body, but it also is part of interoception, where you're experiencing how your body is reacting. So you're intensifying your connection between the part of the brain that runs the body, and it's why people in hypnosis are able to do things. We found in one study that we could get people to increase or decrease the secretion of gastric acid by whether or not they were imagining eating a meal. They would eat imaginary meals. One woman, after half an hour doing it, said, let's stop, I'm full, even though it was an imaginary meal. But she's regulating the part of the brain that experiences somatic interoception. And the third thing is you have inverse connectivity between this executive control region and the posterior part of the cingulate cortex. That's the default mode network. That's a part of the brain where we ruminate about ourselves. We wonder what people think about us. It doesn't happen when we're engaged in doing something or planning something. It happens when you're just sitting back and thinking. That's the part of the brain that gets turned down among experienced meditators, that they just don't, they just are, rather than doing, which is the executive control network, or reflecting on who they are. They're just being, they're just experience things, and you turn down activity there. So hypnosis is similar in, while you're doing it, turning off activity in the default mode, but it's not a kind of more permanent adjustment in the default mode, which seems to happen more in experienced meditators. So the other thing we found in fMRI is we just took people who were high and low in hypnotizability, just put them in the scanner and told them to rest, relax, not try and do hypnosis. And we found that what distinguished the very hypnotizable people is that they have more functional connectivity between the executive control network and the salience network. So it means that you're more likely to allow yourself to get focused if you're high, because you're coordinating what you're doing with the part of your brain that's supposed to worry about whether you're doing something else. They're kind of talking to each other. So the guy who's looking out for trouble is talking to the guy who wants to get the job done, and they work together, and you can focus more intently.
And so in relation to the gastroenterologist study where they were measuring gastric acid through the hypnosis and like the effect of that, the numbers that I wrote down from you describing before was it was an 89% increase in gastric acid secretions.
You remember,
without physically eating
exactly
anything.
Right, without eating anything.
And then it was a reduction of I think 39%, if I heard it correctly.
Exactly.
When you're visualizing that, which it's unbelievable to the mind in this era of time. But I think at one point in history, it would be common to have that perspective.
Of course.
But then we kind of, in a way, got plagued and blessed with the burden and gift of rationality, scientism, and Newtonian laws and Cartesian perspectives. They're really valuable. But if it just comes to a place where we're only in the rational and only in the physical, something like that sounds like, well, I don't want to believe that.
Well, that's well put. I think in part we kind of got bewitched by the biological science approaches, which have their advantages, but their disadvantages. We're also, our salience network is also a novelty detector, and we tend to get distracted by novelty. And so I think one way of putting it is that for the last, couple hundred years, as physical and scientific developments have grown, we've kind of shifted our allegiance to that and said, okay, this is what's going to save us. And what it's looking like is it might save us, but only before it kills us, because, what we're doing scientifically is dangerous as well as helpful. And that the sensible regulation of these developments is part of what's going to determine whether this planet becomes a burned out Hulk or not, And so we've been sort of overtaken or taken over by that. And that's not to say there aren't tremendous advantages to some of these novel bioscientific approaches, but they're not the whole story.
Yeah. It's like the book Shane McGill-Christ, The Master and His Emissary. I feel like you're probably familiar with that. It's like the rational mind kind of is louder than the intuitive listening mind. So it's like a right hemisphere, left hemisphere thing. And so if you don't actually feed bandwidth into that right hemisphere, it'll just stay quiet because it listens. Well, the other side will keep on yelling.
Well, some of it is right and left, but some of it is, neocortex versus emotion and other structures in the brain. And the brain is a huge information processor. And the part that does the kind of linear sequential thinking that we're doing right now is a tiny but computationally expensive part of what the brain does. But the rest of the brain has a whole ton of information. And you don't go, it's not like you read through every file before you make a decision about a certain thing. And a lot of it is accessed through affect or interoception rather than conscious thought. And the brain puts that all together and you make a decision, not always a great one, but it's far more than just simply a logical sum of all the information. And that's how the brain works. And that's how we do what we do so rapidly and generally reasonably effectively.
Yeah. It's so something that I'd like to talk about the Reverie app because something that I recently got into learning about hypnosis and actually learning how to induce and such. And I'm wildly infant with it, and it's wildly interesting at the same time. I feel, and I'm like observing the potential of it. And I feel like you probably have leeriness of a non-psychologist or psychiatrist or dentist or something of the sort, learning how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
But something I noticed now that I've had some repetitions of being induced and experiencing that, I noticed while you were talking about all like the neuroanatomy of what's happening within hypnosis, I noticed myself going into trance with
Huh.
you actually.
Huh.
And now I know what that is. Whereas before I didn't know what that was.
Huh.
And now if you can use something like the Reverie app or, seeing, someone that is able to practice this stuff, you can start to grease the groove and understand that that's actually a gear that you have access to. Whereas most of us, I think, are being entranced throughout social media or whatever we're doing throughout the day. We just don't realize that that's happening. We're being so highly influenced, but it's something that you can actually leverage. And as opposed to kind of living at the peak of the iceberg, you can access that foundation of the iceberg, which is your body, and at any time. You just need to grease the groove. And you need to understand how to operate the system.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm glad to hear you say that. And it's absolutely true that if you begin to recognize it and use it, I mean, technically, I don't hypnotize people. I help people learn how to hypnotize themselves, how to use their ability, how to identify it and use it the way you're describing it, Aaron. If there's someone who isn't hypnotizable, I can talk all day long and nothing's going to happen. And on the other hand, as you're saying, if someone is hypnotizable, then they can allow themselves, with help from some instruction that I give them, to experience and utilize their own hypnotic capacity and ability. And there have been things like, flow states and things like that, where you get yourself into a groove where you're just focused on what you're doing and putting aside other things that might distract you or worry you or anything like that. And that's a tremendous skill. That's a great thing to use. So if you're having pain, you can sit there and suffer. You can take medications that sometimes help but have a lot of side effects and are risky. Or you can learn to restructure your understanding of the pain. So I have, right now, for example, you're sitting on a chair. Hopefully,
I'm on the floor, actually.
Oh, you're on the floor. Sorry, you're sitting on the floor. But hopefully, so that's even harder than a chair. You hopefully were not aware of the sensations in your bottom touching the floor until I mentioned it. If you were, we can stop now. We do it all the time. Our brains just say this is important and worth paying attention to, and this isn't. I had a patient, a young woman who was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, had really bad lower back disease. They couldn't give her pain meds because she had the baby inside. They implanted a nerve stimulator, it didn't work. And when she came in, her pain was 7 out of 10 sitting. And of course, as the baby grew, the pain got worse because it was putting more stress on her lower back. And I had her imagine she was in a warm bath, warm tingling numbness filtered the hurt out of the pain. And she opened her eyes and I said, "How's the pain now?" She said, 3, not 7. And I said, "You look angry. What's the matter?" She said, "Why are you the last doctor I got sent to instead of the first?" And it's true. We have all these natural abilities that we don't think count for much, and we don't take advantage. So in Reverie, people, I tap their hypnotic ability and teach them how to use just focusing on competing sensations, focus on a situation that naturally gives you relief from your pain. And you can summon up some of those associations to make yourself more comfortable within minutes. And so Reverie is available at the App Store, Reveri, or on Google Play if you have an Android phone. And we can measure your hypnotizability. We have a hypnotizability test at the beginning so you can see how hypnotizable you are. And then use it to deal with stress, pain, focus, sleep. We've got a new one coming out on dealing with flying phobias. Stop smoking, eat more sensibly. And so it's just a series of tools that you can learn to use to tap, as you say, your own natural ability, but now grease the groove there. I like that image.
Yeah. Could we talk a little bit about the power of breathing and vision in relation to modulating one's mental, emotional, neurological state. Because it
Sure.
seems like the visual aspect is massive within that trance and like passing into that state. And then with breathing is very interesting because, as you already know, the breathing modulators or portions of the brain responsible for respiration. I might be wrong, but I think it's the medulla oblongata and the pons,
That's
which is at
correct.
the brainstem.
You
So
got
it's
it. You got
literally
it.
the bridge of the body to the brain is the breath. And that's what all the Eastern esoteric people have been saying forever. And neurologically, it's literally it's physically the bridge between the spaces, which is really fascinating. That you
Yes.
can ride the breath into all sorts of different states within the body.
Yes, you can. So there's vision and breathing, and we can go in either direction. You're right that while the brain has the ability to regulate other physiological functions, like as we discussed earlier, the functioning of the gastrointestinal system or heart rate, blood pressure to some extent, it's not a direct connect the way it is with breathing, because with breathing, if we don't think about it, it happens anyway, fortunately. But we can control it instantly. You can inhale deeply, slowly exhale, and help your body relax. And by altering the ratio of sympathetic to parasympathetic activation. And so there are very rapid ways. We just published a study a few months ago, randomized trial, remote trial because of the pandemic, looking at three different kinds of breathing and a brief 5-minute meditation exercise. And people just did this 5 minutes a day for a month. And we found that the breath work in general made people feel happier. They felt better, less negative emotion, more positive emotion. And one in particular helped people not only feel better, but actually slow their average respiratory rate. So we had a whoop strap on that recorded their respirations. And so that's a reduction in sympathetic arousal, that you're just breathing less frequently. And it was simply by changing the balance in cyclic sighing, which is the one that seemed to work the best in that study, in which you exhale twice as long as you inhale. Normally we think if you want to relax yourself, take a deep breath, right? Well, actually, when you inhale, you do that by lowering pressure in the lungs. That sucks in air from outside. And your heart notices that you're also just a bit reducing the return of blood to the atria of the heart. So it thinks, we better pump harder and faster to get more blood circulating. And so it increases heart rate. That's a sympathetic arousal. It's a bit of fight or flight reaction. And this all happens within a few seconds. When you exhale slowly, you increase pressure in the chest. You increase venous return to the heart. And the heart says, fine, we got plenty of blood. I'll slow down. That's the parasympathetic nervous system. And it is our self-soothing system. It's what goes into effect as you go to sleep. You reduce sympathetic arousal and you slow your heart rate, you lower your blood pressure, and you go to sleep. And so the capacity, just by changing the ratio of inhaling to exhaling time, can be a way of very rapidly self-soothing. And so there seems to be different ways of breathing where you can give yourself a quick break and help your body calm itself, soothe itself through regulation of respiration. But some of that is also hypnosis. And you mentioned vision. And it's interesting that, what we do for our induction, it's not the only way to do it, is to look up and slowly close your eyes. Our major danger scanning sensory device is vision. Our vision is pretty good. Our smell and hearing are not that great. We have interoception, but we tend not to think of that as a useful tool for sensory input until things are really bad. But if you're looking up and closing your eyes, you're still alert. You're not going to sleep, but you're turning off scanning awareness visually. You're not scanning to see if there's a predator out there somewhere in the world. So it allows you to relax. And the other thing is you turn on your imaginary visual system. So you picture things on an imaginary screen. That's a message that you can control your environment by doing it with your imagination. So the sensory device that we use to determine what's going on in the world becomes one that we use to imagine how we could reorganize the world and use and organize it in a way that is more helpful to us in dealing with a problem. So, for example, imagine you're in a place where your body naturally feels better, where the pain in your knee doesn't hurt so much by warm, tingling numbness, filter the hurt out of the pain. So, manipulating your visual system can be a very useful way of going into a state of hypnosis. It's also often used in meditation as well. But you allow yourself to be alert, awake, focused, but not worried about sensory distractions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious thing is there's a lot of hypnosis has a lot of barnacles attached to it. It's been kind of diluted and tossed around. It's got a little like mud and dookie hanging off of it.
An old ship.
And yeah, it's like an old ship.
I like that image.
And and even me getting into hypnosis just literally like a couple of weeks ago. That was why I was so interested in talking to you. I've been like studying and research and watching lots of YouTube videos. I had some skepticism, leeriness, and even almost like trepidation within myself because of like, oh, I don't know if I want to lose control, and within that, I think it's because of the barnacles and the dilution of what it is. And what it actually is like you've already mentioned, it's not losing control. It's actually gaining control of your subconscious.
Exactly.
You're developing, it's like you're getting an ATV to ride through your subconscious. Whereas before you were kind of stuck at the surface.
Right.
And it's such a cool operation if you're able to do that. And I'm at the infancy stage of that. In some ways I'm, a little bit further down, but generally speaking, I still feel like, oh my God, I have so much I'm just at the crust of myself.
Yeah.
Ultimately. And if you could develop the tool to do that, I think the sky's the limit. It's.
I think you're absolutely right, Aaron. That's a very nice description of it, and I'm glad you've got this sense of adventure about it. It really is exciting and it's fun, and the very things that people fear the most, as you point out correctly, the fear of losing control. It's really an opportunity to gain control. The brain doesn't come with a user's manual. We don't know everything it can do just because we happen to have one sitting on top of our shoulders, So hypnosis is a way of intensifying your focus of attention, dissociating from other things that might distract you, and being cognitively flexible, seeing things from a different point of view. That's fun. That's a great way of expanding the options you have for how you regulate your body and live your life. And it's a tremendous tool that people don't take full advantage of. And that's the reason that we developed Reverie, is to try and make that as widely available as possible, especially since there's all this skepticism about it. It's try it, you'll like it. Either it'll work or it won't, but it can really help you. And that's something that we wanted to make as widely available as possible.
I wonder your perception, because I think this enters into a realm of conversations around trauma. Mm-hmm. I wonder from your perception, like, how do you define trauma? Where does trauma exist in the body? Where does trauma exist in the brain? How do we, it seems like it's in the body, it's in the subconscious, it's in that subterranean layer that many people are afraid of, or maybe they just don't even know enough about it to know that maybe at some subconscious level there might be some fear around it. Yeah. Maybe I'm talking too much. But I've heard you speak about it in a way that seems quite like true, or it feels right for me. But it's like you need to experience it to be able to reinterpret it, to realize it's not so scary, and then to be able to grow. But as long as you don't actually experience it, and touch it and feel it, and here we are, then it will just sit there and it will fester and it will mold and it will infuse its way into your life in ways that you don't realize, and it will affect your relationships and it will affect your work and affect your anxiety and all of the things. And it's like the path through, the path forward is actually in and through. And it seems like this hypnotic state, however you get there, it seems like it's a path to actually start to kind of clean up some of this subterranean bracing that we may or may not have.
Well, yeah, trauma is the experience of being made into an object, a thing. We're used to agency. We're used to controlling what we do and what our bodies do. And when you are the victim of trauma, you're just treated like a thing. You're hit, you're threatened, you're whatever it is, but you don't control that input for some period of time. And the problem with post-traumatic stress disorder is that instead of working it through, as you describe it, you become reattacked by the memories the way you were by the assailant or the storm or the car accident or whatever it was. So it makes you feel re-traumatized, more traumatized. And so you're absolutely right that the way to get through it is to face it in a controlled way in which you may not control whatever it was that originally traumatized you, but you can control your memories of it and what it means. And so hypnosis, and when you're in a kind of dissociative state, if you're having a flashback to trauma, you're not in the present, controlling what's going on. You feel like you're in the middle of the car accident again, wondering if you're going to live or die after the truck hit your car. It's a re-experiencing of the helplessness rather than a sense of gaining control and processing the trauma itself. And you're also able to address the implications that the trauma has for you. So I treated a woman recently who came from a country that is not famous for treating women well, to put it mildly. And she escaped from there, but not before, as a 12-year-old, she'd been raped by her landlord, and her family was too afraid of the landlord to do anything about it. And as she grew up as a teenage girl, she said, I realized walking down the street that my body wasn't my own. Men felt they had the right to say or do anything they wanted. So she finally gets to the U.S. She gets a job as a healthcare professional, did pretty well, but was increasingly depressed and retired early and just felt terrible. And I had her in hypnosis revisit that episode where she was sexually assaulted by her landlord. And I said, I want you to look at yourself as a little girl now, as if you were her mother. And what would you do? And she started to cry, and she said, well, I'd give her a hug. And I said, is it her fault that this happened? Because that's what she'd been told. You must have been dressed wrong or some bullshit thing like that. And she said, no, she's a sweet girl. And she said, I'm stroking her hair. I'm stroking her hair. And she came out of it, and she said she felt different somehow. And a week later, she called me up and said, my psychiatrist wants to know what you did to me. She said, because I'm not depressed anymore. I'm a different person. And she said, my friends don't recognize me. They say you're so cheerful. And she'd been able to revisit the damage, not just to her body and her dignity, but to her view of herself, that somehow she must have deserved what happened to her. And she realized that she didn't by seeing herself as if she were somebody else, her daughter. And so there are ways in which you can make these sudden changes by, as you mentioned, sort of going deeper and getting into the sort of emotional implications of what you went through in a way that can change them rapidly. She was able, I'm sure she turned down activity in her posterior cingulate cortex and let go of this terrible image of herself that she carried as a burden all her life, that there must have been something wrong with her if that could happen to her.
Yeah. Another thing I've heard you say is trauma is out of sight, but not out of mind. And I would add out of body. You may have added that yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
And then also the essence of trauma is not fear, it's helplessness, which is what you're describing. That's the exactly feeling of being out of control. And we have the opportunity when we are in a position where we are well-resourced, we're with someone who cares about us, it's attentive, is nurturing. If we can create that, if we have enough resourcefulness in our moment to create that container to revisit those aspects in that subterranean space in our subconscious.
That's right.
I think that is the future. I think that will start to surface more the reality that we can do that. And I think it's been kind of shoved under the rug, but that's because it's invisible, and it's a little, but then you actually have those experiences. You're like, oh, okay, this is the stuff. This is the juice.
Yep. Well, very well put. Absolutely right. That it's, and it's, it's not that there aren't times when we're helpless, but it's actually healing to see what parts of the experience are things you were helpless over. And the odd thing is that most people would rather feel guilty than helpless. They'd rather somehow blame themselves as though they could replay the movie and the ending would turn out different. Rather than when she recognized that she had no control over the sexual assault, but she had control over her life and who she was and how much dignity she deserved and respect she deserved. So you reconfront the parts of the trauma where you were really helpless and the parts where you weren't. And that
Yeah.
changes your perspective on what it means.
I wonder, so something in hearing you speak, I hear a lot of both top down and bottom up perspective, but it's a lot of, the brain is the control center. And then there's other like more of like a William James perspective slash, embodied cognition and people in
Mm-hmm.
that realm
Sure,
that
sure.
would say like, well, I think there's a bit of a competition. There's like a bias, but like, well, it's more bottom up. It's like the body, and the guts
Mm-hmm.
and the ectoderm and the skin. It's like,
Yeah.
that's where the thoughts are coming from, and that's where the feelings are and the emotions are stored. And what is the brain exactly? What is the mind?
Yeah. The first question is easier than the second one. I would say, the thing that we probably underestimate, the brain is basically connected to every organ in the body. So there's
Yeah.
the central nervous system, which is the brain, but then there's the peripheral nervous system too. That is a part connected to the brain, part of it. And
Where's
therefore,
the separation?
well, the separation is partly conceptual, partly physical, but it's not entirely separated, thank God. And so we do, in many ways, think with our bodies. We try things out. I think the brain does little experiments on whether you can do something and what it feels like to do it. And interoception tells you about that, what works, what doesn't. It's partly how we train ourselves to stay safe. There are certain things you can do that hurt, and you connect that movement. Putting your fingers too close to a match, to learn that's a bad thing to do. So in a sense, your fingertips are a part of your brain. They're telling you don't do this because it hurts. So I do think that we technically, the part where we seem to think is in the brain, but the information the brain has to do that is connected with the body. So our bodies are, sensory receptors, every part of our bodies, just like our eyes are visual receptors and our ears are auditory receptors. They're all part of what our brain uses to feel and think and act.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's something interesting of like an embodied perspective of self, because we
Mhm.
kind of get the story of this two-dimensional model. We have the textbooks. We've got,
Mhm.
here's this organ, here's this organ, and okay, now we have the
Right,
biceps and the
right.
triceps. And then the reality of the actual felt sense or experience of the body itself, if it had a mind to be able to speak,
Yeah,
it wouldn't know what the hell we're talking about.
yeah, yeah.
So we have this model that we're imposing on top
Yeah.
of us that's ultimately segregated in these little bits and pieces. And then we're trying to navigate our worldview based off of that like separate lens of
Yeah.
self. And I just wonder if it creates a lot of value. And I wonder if also it creates a little bit of like static for our felt experience.
Yeah, I think so. I think we, just as we, oddly enough, diminish, what the brain can do, we also sort of diminish the importance of what the body does to help the brain do what it does. I call
Yeah.
hypnosis minding your body. It's connecting in an overt way, the way you run your body with what your mind can do, interacting with it.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right that we think with our bodies too. Sure.
Yeah. Going into the realm of like the black magic aspect of hypnosis, I've heard you describe a story about a woman who was kind of like hypnotized by her therapist or whatever, and then they got married, and he had her sign his will or something or another, and then she ended up getting in a bike accident, and there's potential some foul play in there. Who knows what? But
Yeah.
how, like, what's the dark side of hypnosis, if there is?
Well, there is. In that case, it was a legal case that I testified in. And he started out, he's one of these guys that had 15 things on his business card, and he was a this and a that. And
Right.
she was a successful businesswoman when she had some, in a relationship problems or something went to him. And she wound up yeah, suddenly he had her new BMW and she had his old Toyota, and she signs over in her will all of her business, not to her family but to him. And she gets a phone call one night around midnight. She dresses in black, goes out onto a busy highway near her home, and gets killed by a truck. And she had no light on the bike or anything like that. And he inherited all her stuff. And so, I couldn't make this up. It's just really ugly. And I'm convinced that he was using hypnosis to manipulate her. Now, people use all kinds of techniques to manipulate people. And, if you're worried about, hypnotic influence on creating false beliefs, think about the fact that 70% of Republicans think that Trump won the last election.
Sure. Yeah.
We're susceptible of social influence, and hypnosis is only one way. But so if people want to exploit other people, there are lots of ways they can do it. And hypnosis can be misused in that way. But frankly, you're best protected if you know how hypnotizable you are. My father had a patient who was a very successful playwright, and he was doing very well. But people were hitting him up for all kinds of donations, and he was extremely hypnotizable, and he would just write out a big check. And his accountant said to him one day, you're doing well, but you're not doing that well, and you're going to be broke if you keep doing this. And so my father's solution to him was, he said, arrange that you're checking all of your checks over $500 have to be countersigned by your accountant. And so he would happily write out these checks, hand them to the guy, give him his accountant's phone number, and say, and I want to wish you a lot of luck. And so sometimes you have to protect yourself. And there are some people who are more susceptible of influence than others. And if you are, it's better to know it and know what to do about it.
I have an interesting question for you. Let's suggest that anybody who has a TV or a cell phone in Western culture is under a steady state of hypnosis presently, and
yeah,
how and perhaps there are some folks out there that do have some consciousness of the direction to kind of steer the people under the trance. How would one regain sovereignty and agency to kind of break one's trance that they may or may not be under?
Well, one thing is, disenroll from TikTok or whatever the other, or Twitter or whatever else it is, recognizing that it's very hard for you to, once you get started, it's hard to stop, and so at a time when you're not directly under the influence, do something that keeps yourself from being under it. I think, find out how hypnotizable you are, because if you are, you may be more susceptible of that kind of influence. But it is good to use altered mental states, both in them but out of them too, at a time when you're not under that influence, to say, look at what I did. Look at what's happening to me. Why do people buy lottery tickets? You're more likely to get hit by lightning than win the lottery. And yet people, throw good money after bad by, buying these tickets. It happens in many, many different ways. And I think the best thing to do is to, play with it a little, experience it. Say, when I go into a state of self-hypnosis and I picture being in a lake, I feel like I'm in a lake. My body feels a little cooler, That's wonderful. That's fun. But it also means come out of it and reflect that if you can change your view of reality so quickly and intensely, you can do it for other reasons. So when some guy tries to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, you think, oh, well, that would be nice to own that. That it can be viewed as better understanding a tendency you have that can help you a lot, but could also get you in trouble.
Yeah. A person, how could they start to develop their own hypnotic ability? Let's say they score a 2 out of, is it 4 on the Spiegel test?
Well, the eye roll is
5?
0 to 4, but the hypnotic induction profile 0 to 10 is the behavior measure, not just the eye roll.
So I know I've heard you suggest that by age, I think 20 or 21, it's pretty static.
That's
like
exactly right.
0.3, 0.6, 0.7%.
Yeah, that's right.
The changeability.
The 25-year interval, it's about 0.7 is the reliability of hypnotizability, and IQ is only about 0.6. So Yes.
Do you think psychedelics could act as a lever to kind of augment that? I know you've also talked about transcranial stimulation.
Right. Right.
I wonder if there's some kind of mystical experiences that could kind of induce that childlike wonderment and awe to open you up into being able to go into that subconscious
Well,
in a deeper way.
it's an interesting question. What I know it can do is while you're on the psychedelic, yes, you get into that, and these altered states become very intense and very real. Now, does it change your ability? Nobody has done that study. It's conceivable. There was a paper in Science just a couple of weeks ago showing that taking some of these psychedelics changes neurons intracellularly and makes them more likely to produce serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that improves mood. A lot of our antidepressants are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but they increase the capacity to create connections between neurons. So you
Yeah.
produce more connections within the neuron with other neurons. So it's conceivable that we can rewire our brains a little bit with having these kinds of experiences, and
Yeah.
that's an interesting possibility. I would say that there seems to be some evidence that for depression, for existential fear, people who just have a couple of experiences with psychedelics seem to be different afterwards. That it's not a matter of simply changing the amount of the neurotransmitter in the synapse; it's changing the way the neurons wire to one another.
Yeah.
That's a possibility, but we don't know yet. But I do think that it's better, to be a traveler in those areas and know what the territory is like, in the way that you live your life.
Yeah, the research from John Hopkins with using psilocybin assisted with therapy, it was 70 or 75% of the people reported as being top 5 most meaningful experiences of their life.
Yes, that's right.
And then it gets into this place where it's like suddenly everything shifts when you get into that realm, because then you start getting into things like God. And people are like, oh, I feel like I had an experience with something that felt like source, got things that science doesn't have language for. And so it's almost like water and oil in a way. You're kind of like, well, we don't know how to process that information.
Well, yeah,
You
but
know?
I think also, the way I would like to think of it, Aaron, is that it's sort of we discover the divinity within ourselves. That is, whatever your beliefs about God, that there is some miraculous things about just the fact that we exist and can experience
Yeah,
things, and that you and I can talk with one another that we don't
it's
fully
crazy.
understand. But I think we tend to underestimate. We I think we give God too much credit sometimes, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for having the ability to love and care and feel and think and plan. And that's a miracle. That's just a miracle. And wherever the miracle comes from, I'll take it. But we don't honor it enough.
Well, we're probably giving God, whatever that means, credit through giving really anything credit, I
Yes,
presume.
that's right.
You
I
know?
think to the extent that he or she made us, um, we're doing what we were made to do. And if we do it better, that's crediting ourselves and crediting whoever made us.
Final question. Do you have any belief system of what happens after we transition out of these meat suits? Die?
Meat suits. uh, I have no idea. I think, as I was just saying, life is in and of itself enough of a miracle that I'm content myself with honoring that miracle. I don't know what happens afterwards. And they asked somebody if he was an atheist or an agnostic, and he said, "I don't know, and I don't care." It's sort of it's beyond, I think, the realm of our absolute understanding, and different people have different beliefs about it, which I respect, but I have no idea.
Yeah. I feel like as long as a person can be in a state of gratitude, it's pretty darn spiritual.
Yeah.
If you're not in a state of gratitude, you're probably living some type of anti-spirituality. But if you
Yeah.
can just come from a place and figure out whatever your orientation is, whether it takes hypnosis, whether it takes meditation, whether it takes punk rock, whatever you're into, to
Yeah.
come to a place where you're like, man, like I am so grateful for this duck in front of me or my body or the fact that I'm breathing right now. I feel like that's pretty godly.
I think let's just make the best possible use of this mind body we've been gifted with. And that is, a credit to the creator if that's the way it happened, but it's a credit to whatever we have been given, and is something that we should feel proud and happy about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, man. I really
You're
enjoyed
welcome. Good.
getting to connect with you. And
Thank you. I did too. Yeah.
so the Reverie app would be a great place for people to go if they want to do self-hypnosis, which is
Right.
all guided by you.
Yes.
And you can go in and do the test there. And the Spiegel test, would it be okay for me to do it right now with you really quick?
Sure. Go ahead.
So
Right.
if a person wants to test their hypnotic ability at home, what could they do?
Well, there are two things. The eye roll test that we're talking about and that we'll do is just like an initial guess of how hypnotizable you are. The 5-minute hypnotic induction profile on the Reverie app is a more thorough examination of how your actual performance is, how much you can experience hypnotic events. So the eye roll is just an initial way of estimating how likely you are to be hypnotizable. And it's something that my father developed, and I'll be glad to test you and see how you do. So hold your head still, look up past your eyebrows all the way up, high as you can. Good. And now as you keep looking up, slowly close your eyes. Close, 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 all the way. Good. All right, that's great. All right, you can let your eyes relax and open them again. So your initial up gaze is a 3 out of 4. You're looking at the ratio of iris to sclera, the white part of the eye that you see as you're looking up. And then it's hard to keep your eyes up while you're closing your eyelids. You're asking the cranial nerves to do two opposite things: to relax the muscles and contract the muscles of your eyelid, but keep activating the muscles that hold your eyes up. And that's hard to do from a cognitive motor point of view, but it's also a way of disconnecting your vision from your actual gaze outward. And that you were a 4 there. So you should be highly hypnotizable is what this suggests.
I'm highly suggestible.
Yeah.
I'll believe anything.
Yeah. If people say you look green, you start to feel green. That's kind of it. And so, yes, you should be very hypnotizable.
And is there something happening with the neurons within the eye where you're looking up, perhaps that like kind of turns on that attention aspect while you're closing your eyes, you're kind of turning down that salience network?
You're right. It's turning down the salience network because you're alert, you're awake, but you're no longer taking in all this visual information.
Right.
If you just close your eyes, you think, "Oh, I'll go to sleep." But this is you're alert, you're awake, you're doing something hard but challenging.
Right.
And you're turning off most of the information that triggers the salience network, which is there a saber-toothed tiger over there on the right? So and it's the reticular activating system, which is in the brainstem, that helps you and the base of the brain helps you be alert. And the cranial it wraps around the cranial nerve nuclei. And so when you close your eyes, you're starting to turn down the reticular activating system and getting ready usually to go to sleep. Drugs that affect the level of arousal also affect the nerves that control eye movement, the 3rd, 4th, and 6th cranial nerves. And so they're very much interconnected. So changes in eye movement are associated with changes in arousal. Opioids give you pinpoint pupils. Amphetamines give you big, wide pupils. So eye movement and the function of the eye is very much related to our level of alertness and arousal.
And is it the down? What is it that creates the suggestibility from a neurological perspective? What is it that allows you to turn into an elephant?
It's a way of maintaining resting alertness without having all of this sensory input, without judgment, just experience without judgment. That's right.
Right.
And so you're alert and aroused, but you're not looking for trouble. You're just allowing yourself to get immersed in whatever you're thinking about. So it enhances the focus of attention.
So cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, man.
You're welcome,
I really appreciate you. The Reverie app, is there anything else? I know you don't do social media, which is probably good for your medulla oblongata, whatever, all the things.
I don't. I think I have a Twitter app, but Twitter handle, but I don't use it. But I would be delighted for people to join us. We also have a website, www.reverie.com, where there's a lot of information about.
And you're not the Spiegel that testified with Johnny Depp.
Oh. I had a good friend came over for dinner that night, and she said, "Spiegel, you told me you would never give testimony about somebody you hadn't examined, but I heard you at the trial today." And I said, "What?" And it turns out it's a David R. Spiegel. I don't have a initial, and it was catastrophically bad. And apparently, what I heard, there were several TikTok things with journalists saying that the lawyer who was defending, what's her name, not Johnny Depp,
Amber Heard, or whatever,
that apparently she had a friend who called her and said, you ought to get David Spiegel to come testify about this. And she looked up David Spiegel and found some local guy who lived near there, so she thought it won't cost that much to get him there.
They were actually looking for you, and they found another David Spiegel.
Apparently. I mean, I don't know what directly, but that's... And so
that's amazing.
They got the wrong David Spiegel. Not that I would have done it, but
right.
It was that apparently that's what happened.
That's so great. Is there any other stuff I should ask about hypnosis before checking out, or do you feel like this was thorough?
I think it's been very thorough. I admire your preparation. You clearly prepared very carefully. I appreciate that, and I think you've gotten the big picture here. That's great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. Well, hopefully we can do a round 2 at some point. Good. And I'd love to go deeper into the psychedelic conversation in particular. And really anything. Like I said, I really value everything you're doing, and I so greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week.
Thank you. You too.
All right. I'll see you, brother. Thanks so much. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. I want to invite you guys over to the Align Podcast YouTube page, where we are releasing 2 instructional videos each week, as well as clips from the podcast that I personally highlight. The videos that we released last week were on releasing the iliopsoas, on ankle mobility, as well as primal movement with Francesca Fit here at On It in Austin, Texas. They're freaking great. I'm very proud of them, and I would love for you guys to check them out. So that's Align Podcast at YouTube. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for doing you. I'll see you next week.